In a few minutes with a very interesting analysis of the tourism markets in Central Vietnam by Ms. Velancia Teo, Sales Manager, Southeast Asia in SDR. And please welcome Ms. Velancia, Sales Manager in Southeast Asia for SDR. Ms. Velancia is an expert in premium data, brand marketing analytics, and marketplace insight for the global hospitality industry. With 10 years of experience in the hospitality industry, he has gained a reputation for her tourism analysis, frequently conducting workshops and presentations at hospitality events and conferences in the region. We now look forward to her analysis of the tourism market in Central Vietnam. And please welcome on the stage Ms. Velancia.
Good afternoon, Xin Chào. Probably we'll just need a bit for the slides to show up. Hope everyone had a good lunch. My name is Velancia from SDR. If you do not know me, that's fine. If you know SDR, then you probably know what this session is going to be about. But of course, if you do not know SDR, by means of introduction, we are a data analytics company. And of course, not wasting any time further, I'm just going to share a little bit about performance insights. And just to start off for global tourism, is global tourism slowing down? Yes, no? Okay, so global tourism is slowing down, but particularly for major markets in China and US. So earlier on, you heard a lot this morning about India market, right? So of course, for Vietnam itself, India source market is not one of the top 5 in there, but nonetheless, it's one of those key markets that's particularly looking into, because India tourists, especially the ones with more expenses that they can actually offer to spend while traveling, is actually coming up worldwide. And of course, there are a lot of trends that we are seeing post-COVID, including preferences of travel, emerging destinations, how travelers actually book the hotels, including AI, which was shared about earlier on, has made a lot of changes with our travel industry. But of course, when we look at performance, sorry. So while waiting, can probably just have a show of hands, because okay, so just this regarding global tourism, just for Vietnam alone, how many of you is confident with the Vietnam hotel industry? So especially for investors, because you're looking at investing into Vietnam market or even other markets, right? So what are your thoughts about Vietnam market itself? Do you think it would actually grow further? Yes, I see some nodding their heads, so that's good. Okay, so going back to this, I'm just going to start off with a global overview of performance there. So the good news is that demand itself has actually recovered to pre-COVID levels. So if you look at the 100 index, that's indexed to the 2019 performance. So globally, good news. Of course, we are happy about it. Yay! So demand has actually recovered to 2019. But on the other hand, if you look at demand growth itself, so this is comparing to last year, you might be thinking, why is this going down right here, right? So at the first few months of 2023, it's still high, where we are seeing 20% or 25% growth. But over the last few months, particularly starting from May 2023, we are seeing the slowdown. So it's not because that the performance is not good, I would not say so, but it's really because in 2023, we are seeing revenge travel, right? So right after COVID, everyone has been rushing to book their flights, to travel, and etc. But right now, we are seeing what we call a normalized growth. So there's no more the 2 digits growth, but rather this is what we call a normalized growth, or basically slowing down in terms of demand growth there. But when we look at occupancy itself. So if you look at this chart, so of course this has contributed to the global performance of slowdown. Particularly if you look into Asia, there are probably two things that I will highlight. So the good news is for Asia itself, we are seeing a 4% growth in occupancy. But that's also particularly because of the ease of travel. So your visa-free travel that has probably encouraged more intra-regional travel within Asia. And the second part is Japan. So I think most of us has been to Japan. So because of the favorable currency exchange rates, Japan is one of the countries that has been doing well for the past couple of months in 2024. But on the other hand, if you look at rates, so rates is still seeing a positive growth at 9%, particularly for Asia itself. But I would really say that inflation is one of the contributors that has pushed the rates further for not just Vietnam, but everywhere within the region. All right, so this is really looking into some of the comparisons within our region here. So if you look into the chart on the left, which is referring to supply, so you see the line, which is this. Probably I'll just highlight this one in particular. So Southeast Asia itself is still seeing a positive growth in supply, particularly because there were rooms in the pipeline that of course was delayed due to COVID and etc., but are still slowly actually opening. So thus that positive growth of supply there. But the good news is that it's a stabilized kind of growth. But on the other hand, when you look into demand, so Southeast Asia is doing pretty well in terms of that demand growth there. But the question is, of course, does it apply to all countries? The answer is no. So, but of course, one question that we want to clarify is that why is Southeast Asia doing good now? So I have to say, honestly, we are pretty late in terms of recovery. So last year, when all the continents, like in Europe, in other places outside Southeast Asia, has been doing very well, Southeast Asia is actually the laggard in terms of recovery performance. But this year itself, in the current few months, it has started to pick up in terms of their performance there. So I would say that we are actually resilient in terms of all the challenges that we do have. And of course, the positivity part in Southeast Asia market is that there are investors coming into this region, particularly because of the low labor costs. GDP is increasing in some of those markets in our region there as well. And of course, the other part is currency depreciation. So when you look into the currency conversions between USD, less of us are traveling out of Southeast Asia, but more would be actually better if they want to visit Southeast Asia because of the better currency conversion rates there. So this is the one that looks into the comparisons of all the different key markets or key countries in Southeast Asia. So all of them actually reported a positive RevPAR growth. So that's your revenue per available room. Not exactly sure why for Philippines, but few notes that I was actually shared from the hoteliers is that they are still pretty much of domestic, less of international, thus of course affecting their rates, the ability for them to push their rates. And for Vietnam, so probably a few months back when I was doing this chart or I was checking the data itself, Vietnam was actually one of the laggard in terms of growth performance there. But recently, I think if you read the news and etc., a lot of people are actually, or visitors are traveling into Vietnam itself. And thus, when we look at the country in overall, occupancy growth is strong and thus pushing up the RevPAR. But otherwise, in terms of rates, we are still seeing a negative growth. And that's particularly because of the supply. Yeah. So, and if you look into this chart itself, so this is the month-on-month comparisons. So one thing particularly to note is, of course, in January, leading the way to February. So January, the New Year period, whereby that particular month alone, Vietnam is doing very good in terms of occupancy performance there. And this is contributed by transient. so your South Koreans on leisure travel, and also groups. So less of the contract stays, which is less of the air cruise and long stays currently in the market. But for overall occupancy performance for Vietnam, it's more of the transient and the groups performance. Taking out recovery or growth or year-on-year performance comparison out of the picture, so this is not looking at growth at all. Vietnam is currently sitting in the lower end of occupancy performance. All right. And of course, when we look at rates itself, earlier on I mentioned about supply. So of course, supply does tend to have that impact in terms of the ability to push up their rates further. And of course, this is what we've seen in all the different segments as well. So this is attributed by your groups, your transient, and your contracts. So particularly for the one in the most right. All right, so this is the daily chart for in terms of Vietnam performance. So the conclusion I had on this chart is in terms of what pushes performance for the country is particularly during the holidays period. So if you look at this chart itself, there are certain peaks on different dates. So that's particular during the New Year period, the Tet holidays, and the May holidays. So your Labor Day. Yeah, and of course, particularly looking at performance there. So if you look at the greens, which is the stronger performance, and then the reds are the lower performing months. So clearly, during that past couple of months since 2023, Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City are the ones that actually bring up the performance for the country. Less of other markets, like including Danang, Phuket, and etc. But in the recent months, you do see that there's actually a pickup in terms of their performance for Danang and Nha Trang Cam Ranh in this case. Yeah. So I guess this is another one that everyone is keen to know into. So just looking at this chart, I have some notes on the right. So this chart in particularly is only looking at growth performance. So I would really say that in terms of Phuket and Nha Trang Cam Ranh performance has been doing pretty well this year. But one thing to note is that still regardless, Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, which is the two key cities in Vietnam, is still the better performing ones. But of course, we all know that Phuket was doing not really well last year because of the high flight prices and etc. So deterring locals away from the market. But nonetheless, what we are seeing is that Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh is actually a top performing in terms of occupancy this year, followed by Danang, which is the next in terms of occupancy. Yeah. So I thought this was actually something interesting to share, because if you look at this chart, all the markets that we are seeing a kind of a stronger performance during weekdays than the weekends. But what I actually infer for Vietnam itself is because most of those tourists probably when they visit Vietnam, probably it's still more of the on the leisure side. But of course the crossover where they extend their stays to weekdays for in this case. That's why we do not really see a big difference between the weekdays and the weekends comparisons. Yeah. So this is on the different classes of performance. So luxury and upper upscale are the ones with the higher ADR, whereas the mid-scale and economy class hotels are those on the lower class or lower ADR, sorry. So one thing you could clearly see that there's actually a stronger pickup for Vietnam in terms of the lower class hotels. Okay, so what does that mean? So if I show you this, if you look at the table right above, this is actually the absolute occupancy for all the different three classes just for Vietnam alone. So what this means is that in terms of performance, in the past there used to be a bigger gap between the luxury class hotels and the mid-scale economy hotels. But recently you could clearly see that it's already at 48% occupancy for the lower class properties there. So it means that it's actually catching up because of the stronger growth that we are looking at for the lower range hotels there. And what does that actually mean for your supply and demand? Then as we look into the pipeline, so this is comparison of pipeline, which is new hotels that are coming in your market. So of course, taking China out of this picture, which has the most pipeline count, the next one is actually in Asia. So, and of course, nonetheless, needless to say, Vietnam has actually 77,000 keys currently still in the pipeline. And this is covering from economy all the way to luxury class hotels, including resorts, hotels, and service apartments. So 45% of them are actually opening within next 3 years, so which is still 2026. And of course, within Danang itself, there's 9,000 keys, not 90K, sorry. And of course, for Hoi An, it's about 4,000 keys, whereas for Hue, it's around 1,600 keys there. And if you need more information, feel free to reach out to me, but just beware that I'll probably pitch to our product. So, but of course, if you look at this chart, this pie chart below, most of it are actually under the upper mid-scale and upscale hotels. So while this is not really like representing, that huge amount is not representing the economy mid-scale hotels, but that probably does not mean that, it's not going to be competitive for your existing hotels that you represent or you have for currently. So, and of course, the second last part is on beach destinations. So I thought this is interesting for us to look into. So this is a comparison of the different beach destinations within our region still. So if you look at the green line, which represents Bali, so Bali has been doing well, particularly because of international tourism there. So Danang is pretty good in terms of performance there. So it's just the third one in the current performance based on just last couple of days performance there, but this summarizes in terms of the competitiveness of market performance or beach destinations performance in Southeast Asia. All right, so the topic for this event is all about future of hospitality, right? So I'm just going to share a little bit on the forecasted performance. So this is done together with Tourism Economics. Domestic, no issues, we have recovered last year, but international is forecasted to only recover in next year, and most of it is deemed to be still mostly intra-regional, so within the region itself. And most of it, if you look at this chart alone, we do see a positive RevPAR growth. So this is forecasted till 2025, but majority of this is due to because of the push in your rates performance. So for Vietnam alone, because we saw earlier on in terms of the rates, still a negative growth there. So it might not reflect exactly how Vietnam would be performing next year, but this is in general based on the APAC performance, forecasted performance for APAC. All right, so lastly, a summary. So earlier on, the first thing that I talked about was demand. So demand itself has normalized a slower growth that you see, so no longer that 2-digit growth. And then the shift in source market, so we used to see so South Koreans, Chinese, but right now there's always that shift to Indians and of course less of the Chinese markets there. Supply is a key factor because it determines how probably how quick you can actually push out your rates and in terms of your RevPAR performance. And of course, particularly for Vietnam, holidays and events would be a key driver in terms of pushing Vietnam performance, particularly for occupancy there. So that's all I have for today. Thank you very much. Cảm ơn and thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Velancia. And our colleague will